Full disclosure, for most of my life, I knew Don Bluth as the Anastasia guy. I had the tape as a kid, I loved the movie back then, and I love it to this day. It wasn't until years later that I discovered that, before making the greatest animated musical of all time, Don Bluth had made himself a career from true masterpieces, which often explored heavier themes and traumatized the crap out of children. He then went on to make some movies that are okay at best, and then he made the greatest animated musical of all time, but by that point it didn't really matter, because he had already made a name for himself, and he would go down in history as one of its most beloved faces of animation. And don't get me wrong, I love Secret of NIMH as much as the next guy, but I hated Land Before Time so much as a kid that I saw it once and then never watched it again. Don Bluth's contributions to animation are phenomenal, but to me, and I say this with all the love in my heart, he will always be the Anastasia guy. And again, for the longest time, that's where I thought the story ended. There was Anastasia, and then there was Bluth's older stuff. After that 1997 box office hit, I'd never thought of looking into what lied ahead in the timeline. I was so in love with the past that I refused to look into the future. Fortunately, this wasn't the case with Bluth, as the future would be the theme of his next cinematic masterpiece. Unfortunately, this movie would be a flop at the box office, signifying the end of Fox Animation Studios and of Bluth's career. What kind of movie could cause this to happen? Well, that's what I'm here to explore. I want to talk about Titan AE. Here's the premise. Our hero is a rebellious young man who works at a dead-end job and has no real prospects for a future. This all changed when it was revealed he holds the secret map to a place of great value, hidden deep within the galaxy. In order to find this place, he joins a crew of colorful characters and sets off into space. This young man is rather resentful of his father, because he left our hero behind when he was very young, and he still has some unresolved issues there. Throughout his journey, he bonds with an older crewmate who ends up serving as the paternal figure he never had. This all falls apart when our protagonist discovers that this man has been plotting against him this whole time, and is only using him to get to the secret location hidden in the map. Now he must reach his destination before the villains do, or everything will be lost. And if that story sounds interesting, then boy have I got a movie for you! It's called Treasure Planet. But okay, real talk now. Reducing Titan AE to a Treasure Planet copy is grossly misrepresenting both movies, even because Titan came out first. Just keep these parallels in mind because we'll come back to them later. Let's look at Titan's story. The movie centers around Kale, with a C, a bright little kid who had to watch Earth be mercilessly destroyed by a race of aliens called the Dredge, who are made of pure energy. Kale's dad has to leave him behind as he tries to save the Earth's last weapon, which is known only as the Titan. As he says goodbye to his son, he also gives Kale a ring, promising to meet him again, and saying that for as long as he wears it, there's still hope for humanity. Fast forward to 15 years later, and Kale has grown into a brooding rebel without a cause, while the painfully 2000 soundtrack tries to convince us that he is, in fact, super cool. He is soon found by Corso, a friend of his dad's, who has been apparently searching for Kale all over the galaxy. He reveals to the boy that this ring is actually a genetically encoded map that can lead him to the Titan, supposedly saving humans from desolation. Just as Corso finds him though, the Dredge do too, and our heroes barely manage to escape. They are rescued into Corso's spaceship, which is filled with colorful characters. You've got Preet, the sarcastic first mate, Goon, the eccentric navigator, Stith, with enough thighs to kill a man, and Akima, with the only haircut that Asian characters were allowed to have back in the day. They need help deciphering the directions in the map, so they go to a planet populated by Gowl, a race of goth bats. The dredge catch up to them, and we have a chase sequence through exploding trees, in case this movie wasn't extreme enough for you. But Kale and Akima end up being captured. The dredge imprison Kale and make a copy of the map, and they toss Akima into space because she's not really useful to them. She is rescued by the rest of the crew, who is somehow able to track her. Meanwhile, Kale learns how to manipulate the energy-based structure of his cell and manages to escape, hijacking a battleship and going after Corso and the others. Now that the gang's all back together, they get a few moments to bond and they set their course to the new location shown on Kale's map, which supposedly houses the Titan. As they stop by a drifting human colony in order to get supplies, Kale and Akima learn that Corso and his first mate are planning to betray them by selling the Titan's location to the dredge. The two are caught eavesdropping and barely escape with their lives. Kale gets to see how humans have been living for the past decade, and he is touched by their hope and resilience. He convinces Akima to fix an old abandoned spacecraft in order to try and reach the Titan before Corso and the dredge do, which leads to a long stealth chase through a field of ice crystals. Our heroes finally reach the Titan, which is packed with the DNA of animals that used to inhabit the Earth. The Titan is actually a kind of planet generator, capable of creating an Earth 2.0, which was the plan back when the humans escaped, but the machine ran out of energy and has remained dormant all these years. This is all revealed in a message left by Kale's dad, who turns out had died in his mission. Corso catches up to them and threatens to kill them, but Preed then double betrays them and threatens to kill Corso too. As they are fighting, the dredge find their location and plan on destroying the Titan. No, our heroes cannot catch a break, thank you for asking. Kale has the idea of using the dredge themselves to power up the Titan, since they are made of pure energy. In order to do so, he has to manually adjust some of the gear on the outside of the structure, while the rest of the crew tries to hold the dredge back. Kale ends up becoming trapped by a dredge spaceship, but Corso goes through a change of heart and saves him, helping him fix the equipment even if it costs him his life. Kale's idea works out, and the dredge are eliminated by powering the very thing they were trying to destroy, creating a new planet for all humankind to live in. The end. As far as sci-fi stories go, this one seems pretty solid. It's got a good mix of action scenes and serious ones, giving our characters time to both interact and to show us what they're capable of. The idea of humans trying to survive in a hostile, colonized space, or of creating/finding a new planet to live in isn't exactly new, but it's been executed finally enough here to win us over. Then, why was this movie such a disastrous flop? At the time it was released, the film was heavily praised for its CGI effects, and that's about it. It appears that the general consensus among critics was that the story was alright, but nothing to write home about. The soundtrack was hit or miss, leaning more towards the latter than the first, and it looks like the marketing wasn't helping either.
Imagine the Earth without the Super Bowl. Now imagine the Super Bowl without the Earth.
But that doesn't seem all that bad. At least, not enough to obliterate a studio and end someone's career. However, the real issue with Titan AE is that the full chronicles of its failures extend beyond the movie itself. In order to better understand it, we need to shift our eyes away from fiction and into the real world, which, to be fair, can sometimes be just as entertaining. Our story begins with a little company you guys might have heard of called the Walt Disney Studios, and they were losing a ton of money in the 80s. Even though they were once considered a powerhouse of entertainment, they seem to have lost their spark when it came to animated movies. This was good news for our guy Bluth, because he had worked for Disney in the past but left to start his own company, and his films were gathering a lot of praise and attention. The table started to turn with the arrival of the 90s, as Bluth's movies weren't reaching the same level of success as they once did, and Disney was starting to bounce back from its funk.
Well. How the turntables...
Some ideas were being discussed as to what the company's next movie should be, including a fairy tale adaptation and what was known at the time as Treasure Island in space. The first became The Little Mermaid, and we'll talk more about the second later. Now that Disney was back on top, every other studio wanted what Disney now had. 20th Century Fox responded by creating Fox Animation and by hiring a guy named Bill Mechanic to run it. Bill was actually a former Disney employee, mostly known for being the guy who orchestrated the company's video market. And he went ahead and hired Don Bluth, also a former Disney employee, along with his pal Gary Goldman, to work on the studio's animated response to Disney's success. And they responded by creating the greatest animated musical of all time. But it's kind of hard to move forward after that, because mirroring the Disney formula can only get you so far. Bluth and Goldman started working on a direct-to-video sequel to Anastasia, but the studio needed to plan its next movie fast. Meanwhile, it seemed like the idea of having, as you might recall, Treasure Island in space hadn't fully died at Disney, because other producers started playing around with the idea. It eventually got turned into something called Planet Ice, which Mechanic passed down to Bluth and Goldman in order for them to turn it into the studio's next success. The thing is, those animators had never truly worked with sci-fi storytelling before. But they took the project anyway, both to show that Fox Animation wasn't just a Disney copy, but also because if they didn't take it, they would have no other projects and the studio would be shut down. So they ran with it. The name was changed to Titan AE, in which AE means After Earth, a fact that only took me about 90 minutes of the movie to get. They decided that the guy from Anastasia was so hot that they just made him blonde and gave him Matt Damon's voice. And they made sure the soundtrack was extra cool so that they could conquer the teen boy demographic, the only group that Disney hadn't been able to appeal to yet. But here's the catch. Because the Planet Ice project had gone through several rewrites with no progress, the studio had already sunken $30 million into it, and they only gave Bluth about $50 million more, as well as a very rushed schedule to finish it. Aside from that, Mechanic was going through some disagreements with the higher-ups at the studio, and his position in the company was uncertain. To make matters worse, the staff at Fox Animation was cut from 320 employees to just 60 halfway through production. Titan AE premiered to disappointing numbers at the box office and reviews that ranged from okay to mediocre at best. Mechanic was let go from the company, and Bluth stayed away from the animation scene for 15 years before returning with his Dragon's Lair project, which in the end isn't even going to be fully animated. The movie's production history is almost as eventful as the movie itself. From the creation of a studio determined to battle Disney, led by Disney's former staff, attempting not only to emulate their formula, but to go even beyond that. There is a tragic element to how Titan AE's demise was brought upon itself precisely because it was trying to be something new. The inclusion of a painfully contemporary soundtrack as an attempt to win over the one demographic that still eluded the major animation studios, as well as the weirdly misguided marketing, suddenly, it all seems a lot more understandable if you look at it through the lens of a company trying to stand its ground through the premise of novelty. And in many ways, Titan really did succeed in being something unprecedented. The mix of CGI and traditional animation was still new territory, and it was pushed to the brink in order to bring this version of space to life. At a time where the internet as we know it was still in its most basic stages of development, the movie made history by being the first to ship its screening copies entirely through digital means, dealing with the challenges of encryption. They even ran a surprisingly interactive online marketing campaign where the users could access a website dedicated to space news, which would build the lore of the Titan universe up until the point of the movie's release. The products of these efforts can even be seen within the movie itself. At a time where Disney was ruling the world with its family-friendly branding, we have a story that is not afraid to show danger and violence, but never in a way that feels gratuitous. The challenges these characters go through have real stakes to them, especially when you see other creatures being disintegrated on screen by the villains. Kao's relationship with the rest of the humans is also worth talking about. You can see he deeply resents his father for parting with him as the planet was being destroyed, and then never fulfilling his promise of finding his son again.
I'll show you how much like my father I really am. I'll leave.
Corso's mission of finding Kao feels to the boy like a poor surrogate for what an actual family reunion could be like, but with Corso being an old friend of his father's, it's Kao's only chance at finding someone who understands his grief, and who wants to see him safe just as much as his father once did, which makes Corso's betrayal even more painful. As for Akima, Kao shows her little to no empathy when it comes to her dream of saving humanity. He despises the homeless life that humans have been forced into, and he wants to find a Titan not because of the greater good, but because it can bring him closer to his father. However, it is through Akima that he learns about the sense of love and community that humans carry with them even through the desolation of space. And it's what motivates him to try and reach the Titan before the villains do. These kinds of relationships are where the movie truly shines. It's a sort of realness that Disney wasn't even close to tackling. The visuals are also not something that should be ignored. Even though they look a little dated now, they were actually one of the movie's biggest selling points, and the one that was the most heavily praised. The dredge designs are just bonkers, and making them fully CGI in a universe inhabited by traditionally animated characters only makes them even more unsettling, which truly adds to the atmosphere. Space is almost a character itself in terms of design. It's red and dark and threatening and aggressive, and it really hammers in the idea that humans have no way of thriving as long as they're aimlessly drifting through it. There's this brilliant contrast between the deep crimson of space and the bright yellow of the Titan, the same light that shines from within the makeshift houses of the drifter colonies. This idea of hope trying to prevail even in the most hostile of places, and the relief of finally finding a place that can help you escape from the darkness of the galaxy. And all of this comes from a team whose previous experience working with sci-fi came from an arcade game. Wonderfully animated, of course, but shallow in terms of anything resembling a story. And if they didn't take on this project, they would have nowhere else to go. Despite the deadlines and the cuts to their already tight budget and the threat of termination, they still managed to deliver a movie that can stand on its own, at a time where everyone else was trying to copy what the more successful studios were doing. I can't say that Titan AE is perfect. The world building is ambitious, but leaves a lot to be desired. We're supposed to relate to Kao's wish of finding his father, but we barely know anything about the guy, or how the Titan came to be. They also try to push a romance story between the leads, because you can't have a movie without one, I guess, and it could have been developed a little better. But I am also aware that, had I grown up with this movie, I would be ignoring all of those flaws in the name of nostalgia. Even though I am only now coming into contact with the film, I can tell that everything about it is absolutely iconic. The visuals, the soundtrack, the characters, it's all a wonderful product of the age that it was made in, and it's certain to leave a mark in the minds of anyone who comes across it. Titan AE walked so that Treasure Planet could run. I cannot talk about Anastasia. Any sort of review I would attempt to write for it would only end up as several pages of praise and would eventually derail into a cover of Once Upon a December. It was, essentially, the only piece of Don Bluth media that I grew up with. And when I came across Titan AE, with all of its crazy visuals and dated songs and snarky characters, I realized I had stumbled upon a buried iconic gem. And I knew for a fact that there must be thousands of people out there who, with all the love in their hearts, know Don Bluth first and foremost as the Titan AE guy. Thank you for watching. Well, hello there. It was very nice of you to watch this video. If you have enjoyed the video, you can do those cool things such as clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the notification bell too. You can also follow me on Twitter and share this video with your friends. Feel free to leave a comment down below, especially if it is about how much you love Titan AE. If you really like what I do, you should consider supporting me on Patreon. I have linked it down in the description, and I highly recommend you check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye!
Imagine the Super Bowl without the Earth.